Hello everyone, and welcome to this quick tutorial on how to get started with particle effects in Stingray. We're going to be going through a couple basics today. We're going to basically create a simple particle effect to begin with, and then we're going to go through some of the more complicated aspects of creating a particle effect in Stingray. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin, the first thing we're going to want to do is create a location for our particle effect to exist in. So let's go ahead and create an effects folder. So as you can see here in this asset browser window, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the content folder. So starting at the base of my project, I'm then going to jump into the content, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to go create folder. And I'm just simply going to create a folder called FX, okay, for particle effects, and hit OK. You can name it whatever you'd like. I'm going to call it FX. And then inside of this folder, the first thing we're going to want to do is just right click and say create and particle, okay? And once we do that, we're going to be able to choose a name for our particle effect. So let's go ahead and call this one basic particle. Actually, I don't like to have spaces, so I'm going to go basic particle. Okay, so that should be good enough, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And that's going to give our base particle. Now, what you'll notice here is that we have a material and we have a particle effect itself. When we select the particle effect itself, you'll notice that in the property editor, we now have this new window that we can kind of deal with. And we can tab out this system and kind of see the pieces and components that are creating it. And as you'll notice, if you look in the asset preview, you don't really have anything happening yet, okay? So the first thing we're going to want to do is get that to show something, okay? So you can see that there's that one little dot. I don't know if you can see it on screen, but I'm assuming you can. And it's kind of useful, but we're going to want to make it a little more cool, okay? So let's go ahead and make it a little more advanced, and let's make it do something. So we're going to want to make it a little more dynamic than that, and how we're going to do that is by first just adding some movement to it. So right now it's not moving at all. So what it's doing is it's just building a particle and it's repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating, okay? So that's okay, but we don't really want it to do that. We want to create a particle effect, and particle effects aren't just repeating on top of themselves. So to do that, let's go ahead and add some sort of movement to it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is just add some gravity. Okay, so acceleration and gravity. And we'll get into some of the other ways of moving it, which are under the velocity tab. But for now, let's try gravity out and see what that does. Okay, so once we add the gravity, we should see that we're now getting some movement. Okay, so now we're getting like a dripping faucet where it just continuously creates this movement, and that's going to be great for things like waterfalls or any kind of falling movement. So it gives us something to work with, and we can actually see something happening now. So to kind of recap, let's just see what is happening here. So we have this system, and the system is your base of your particle, okay? So this is your core elements of your particle effect, okay? So in here we have things like the total. So this total number is really important, because if you set your emitter to a high rate, right, it's not really going to change anything, because we have a total amount of 10. So I actually noticed in some of the forums that people were confused as to why we were having the like a limited number of particles, and this is going to be your limit. So if I were to set this to something like 1, you will see that we only get one particle creating at a time. So there's that one particle dripping once, twice, 3 times, etc. So it doesn't matter how fast I set my rate to, it's always going to fall back to this total number, okay? So this total number is extremely important, and it's also important for optimization. So we may want to have a limit so that we don't overwhelm our computer with creating billions and billions of particles. So keep in mind that this total number is the overarching kind of maximum number of particles that this specific system will be allowed to create. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is let's just increase that to something like 1,000 for now, and see what happens. So now we should be getting our particles coming into play again, and we should be getting many more particles. And the other thing you're noticing is that it's stopping at a certain point. Okay, so that's going to be the particle lifetime. Okay, so here's the particle life. So if we were to set the max to something more like 10, we should see that now our particles are going to create and fall much further down. Okay, so particle life and total are very important because they kind of dictate the entire life cycle of a particle. Okay, so this tells us our total number of particles that we're allowed to have, and this dictates our total lifetime of that particle effect. Okay, so that just kind of sets our base parameters of our particle. So let's set this back to something a little more reasonable, like 3, and that should do it. And you'll notice that there's also a minimum lifetime. Okay, so that is going to be more relevant later, but for now, let's just understand that we can also set a minimum lifetime. So it will always live at least 1 second and live as long as 3 seconds. Okay, so that's kind of how that works. And we can do things like tilt and spin, which won't really do much here because we're only having a little dot of a particle, but we can actually use billboards, which we'll get to in a minute, and this would affect those billboard particles. And in effect, these are actually spinning right now, but we have nothing attached to them to show that effect. So either, both of these aren't really going to do anything right now because they're not able to kind of show that effect. It's just a dot, and therefore the dot, whether it's tilting or rotating, doesn't really show anything. Okay, so this is our base system properties. Okay, so that's the beginnings and the basics of our particle effect. Okay, so then we're going to go into this thing called emitter and rate. Okay, and what the emitter rate does is that kind of increases or decreases how many particles we're going to create at a time. So every second we're going to create 10 particles. Okay, so and there's a minimum and a maximum number here also. So how that kind of works is if I were to set this to 1, we should see that now our particle is going to be a little more sporadic. It's going to vary between 1 and 10 per second. Okay, so this gives us the ability to randomize that emitter rate. Okay, so this is super important, and particles are usually wanting to be more dynamic. In other words, they're going to have lots of randomizations, and that's what kind of makes a particle effect feel natural and real. Explosions and things like that don't always happen exactly the same. So this gives us that randomization capability, and you're going to see this min and max through a lot of different parts of the particle effect system. So the next thing we have on our list here is the material billboard. Okay, and what this allows us to do is be able to actually attach graphics to our particle effect. Okay, and we can do a whole bunch of things in here. We can set alpha masks, we can choose to use a vertex alpha, we can use additive blend, lit particles, etc., etc., etc. But to do that, we actually need to have some sort of a texture to work from. Okay, so let's just create something right now, and we're probably just going to work with the diffuse for now. But you can create normals and speculars as you need. But just to demonstrate the effect of a billboard, let's go ahead and just create a simple like smoke effect. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch up Photoshop, and I'm going to get that running. So Photoshop, and I'm just going to create a simple little billboard for using for this purpose. Okay, and it's not going to be anything super creative. It's just going to be sort of a very simple, like, kind of smoke effect. So we can have something to work from here. So I'm just going to go File, so I'm just going to go File and New. And I'm just going to create a particle, a standard document. So I'm going to make this 1024 by 1024, and I'm going to hit OK. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to double click on background so I can delete the background, and I'm going to get rid of that layer altogether. Okay, so now I've just got a transparent background, and I'm just going to create a simple kind of grungy brush mesh here, and kind of work from that. Okay, so there I go, just kind of clicking around on screen. I'm not trying to do anything super great, I'm just trying to get an idea across. So don't look this to be a phenomenally great texture or particle effect, but it's just something to show the idea. Okay, so all I've done is I've kind of clicked around and I've got this kind of grayish, kind of smoky looking effect. All right, and the only thing I want to do is I want to make it white. So I'm going to go ahead and go Edit, Fill, and I'm going to set it to white, and I'm going to go Preserve Transparency, and I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so now that's just a whitish effect now. Okay, and I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to go PNG. and I'm just going to put it on my desktop to make it easy to find. Okay, so I'm calling it smoke.png, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, so now that that's created, I'm just going to quit out of Photoshop, and I'm going to create a new folder in here. So I have my FX folder, and inside my FX folder, I want to create a location to keep my textures. So I'm going to go create folder, and I'm just going to call it FX_textures. Okay, and there it is. So double click on that, and I'm going to go import and navigate to my desktop and find that smoke PNG, okay, and import it. All right, great, so that should pretty much do what I needed. Now what I can do is I can grab my diffuse map and I can say smoke and grab that texture, okay? And once it compiles, we should be pretty good. Now, you'll notice that it's not actually doing anything yet. And the reason that it's not doing anything yet is because our size is just set too small. So if we go into the size, we can change the size of it to be something a little more reasonable. So let's make it 3 and 3. Okay, and now you should see that we're actually getting the Billboard to produce like some sort of an effect. Okay, so here we go. So there it is. And now we're getting our particle effect to have a Billboard, and as you can see, there's some transparency in there, and it's starting to do as we expect. Okay, now there are a bunch of different things in here we can play with. We can make our particles lit, which will actually make our particles light up, and if you'll notice that it's not really working the way we want it to. So what we have to do is turn on something called additive blend, and the 1-bit alpha, and that should go ahead and do what we're looking for. But as you can see, we won't get that real transparent nature any longer, okay? So just something to be aware of. You can play with this a bit, and it does have a transparency, but because it's on 1-bit alpha, it doesn't really work the same way anymore. And you can kind of play with these different blend modes to kind of get what you're looking for and try to make it work well. But usually lit particles make things very opaque, so just something to be aware of. And you wouldn't normally make a cloud particle to be lit anyway, so just something to be aware of. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back off again because I have no need for it, and there we go. So that is the Billboard system, okay? So size, we kind of experimented with that a moment ago, and as you can see, what size does is it allows us to set the size. And I wanted to show you something else, and that is this scale over time. So what scale over time does, and anything over time works in the same fashion, and it basically says from the beginning of its lifetime to 1 being the end of its lifetime. So that is, sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself here, but from 0 to 1 is equal to whatever your maximum lifetime is. So if your max lifetime is 3, that 1 is actually, so this 1 is actually 3. So just something to be aware of, that this is from the end, the start of its life to the end of its life, and not really to be related to 0 and 1. That has nothing to do with seconds. So that's just over its course of its lifetime, 1 being the end of its lifetime, 0 being the beginning of its lifetime. Okay, and what we can do is we can actually change this over time. So here we have kind of a neat effect where we're changing each particle as it kind of gets born small and becomes big. Okay, so that's following this, and we can add extra points to kind of adjust how this works, and you can do all sorts of funky things. And there we're getting some very weird movement, but just to demonstrate the idea. So you can actually change your lifetime, your particle size over its lifetime, and very useful effect. And to add points, you just left click, and to remove points, you just right click. Okay, so we can just get rid of that one, get rid of that one, and kind of make it grow over time. So so that's that. So next thing we can do is color, and this is more related to like I created a white particle, so this will actually have some effect. So let's go ahead and make it red, and we should see that our particles are now turning red. So you can do that kind of a thing in here. If you leave it white, it'll be whatever the color was of the particle itself. So if your Billboard is multiple colors, it'll just hold that color. So you can also add points to this so that it happens over the time. So again, this is sort of like that over time effect. So Here what we're having is it's starting white and becoming red over the course of its lifetime, and you can add more points to this so you can make more colors. Double clicking on the little square will give you the ability to change the color, so we can go ahead and do that. Now, one thing to be aware of, it's very sensitive. Oops, sorry. You always have to hit the OK button just to be aware. Something that always gets me. So hit OK and then it'll hold, and that's that. So opacity is the same thing with the life scale. So by making it go from fully opaque to transparent, we have now the particle disappearing over time. So as its life is increased, it will kind of fall off in opacity. Okay, so that is our color mode. Oops. And you can adjust this just like you would any other kind of graph like this. All right, so that's the color, and acceleration we already played with. Now smoke normally rises, so let's say we wanted this to rise, we can just make this something like 1, and now it will kind of float upwards like a smoke effect really would, or 3, and kind of get that smoke rising into the distance. Okay, so that is the basics of particle effects. Now, one last thing that I want to show you is that particle effects can have multiple systems. And you can add all sorts of different things to your particle effects. So we can add collisions, we can do all sorts of different things here. And you should play with all of them because they're really cool and you can do a lot of different things. Oh, and velocity is important too. So let's go into velocity really quick. So right now what we have is just gravity moving it upwards. Okay, and let's get rid of the gravity. Let's leave gravity. You know what? Let's get rid of it. So let's remove that component and let's go ahead and add a velocity. Let's add a cone velocity. Okay, so what a cone will do is give you the ability to kind of create a particle effect within a cone's movement space. So right now what's happening is it's moving up on the z-axis. So the cone is facing upwards. So the bottom of the cone, or the tip of the cone, is at the bottom and is kind of rising like that. Okay. So, but you can actually change its direction by any of these. So if I wanted to make this turn right, I could make this 0 and make this 1, and now the effect will go to the left. If I make it -1, it'll go to the right, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can adjust the direction that the cone faces with this. So that's that. Theta of this, so your max theta is going to be how wide of a cone is it, okay? So let's go ahead and make that something like 40, and you'll see that it makes a much wider cone, okay? So that's kind of like the width of the cone. So it's now much wider, like so. And you can also increase its velocity, or decrease its velocity in this case. So that'll make it slower, and 3 will make it faster, and 5 will make it even faster. And that's how we can handle the cone velocity. Okay, and all the velocities are going to work in a similar fashion, and I would recommend to just go ahead and play with those and see how they work out for you. Okay, so that's basically it for how particle effect systems get built and managed and worked with. But I do want to show you, like I said, I want to show you that you can create multiple systems within one particle effect. So right now what we have is this kind of smoke rising off in the distance, and it's a pretty bad effect, but it shows the idea. So what we want to do now is, let's say we wanted to have little sparks shooting out of the bottom as well. Okay, so what we can do is we can go right click and say add system. Okay, and this will automatically create a new system. And again, we're presented with the same base properties that we had before. And what we can do now is, let's give this a movement. So let's go velocity, and let's try the box one this time, okay? And we're just going to go ahead and make this a big box. So -3 to -3 to -3 and 3, 3, 3. Okay, so now we've got a nice big explosion of sparks coming as well. So that just kind of shows that you can create multiple systems within one particle effect, and you can make an infinite number of these. Okay, so go ahead and try all sorts of different things. You can attach different billboards, so you can have different smoke particles, you can have all sorts of different things. And one other thing that I should show you really quick is, I'm going to save this particle effect, is how to actually place it, okay? So once you have your particle effect, and we've been working in this asset preview, but we might want to actually show it as a, in our level. So all we have to do is just select our particle and place it as a normal effect. And you'll see that we're getting that to go off and be placed. And I accidentally placed two of them. Let me delete that one. And as you can see, we can just move this around and we're pretty much good to go. All right, so that's basically it with particle effects. I will do a continued lesson at some point soon where I will be showing you how to trigger particle effects, but that'll come in the near future. All right, so for now, I hope you very much enjoyed this particle effect tutorial, and I hope you learned something. All right, great. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.